Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast on Mental Health News Radio Network. Happy New Year. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope everyone had a lovely holiday and are enjoying the start of 2025. I'm Lorilee Binstock, host of a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast on Mental Health News Radio Network and anywhere else you get your podcast. Today's guest is John Ford, founder of Empathy Set, which are feelings and needs flashcards. John has also created a comprehensive dictionary, a versatile app, and talking sticks, all designed to simplify and enhance interpersonal communication. John is a seasoned mediator with a passion for emotional intelligence. John Ford and Associates stands as a beacon for those navigating the complexities of interpersonal relationships in the workplace. John, thank you so much for joining me today.
Lorilee, it's great to be here with you.
Well, you have a story that has really taken you from South Africa, doing human rights work, to with the UN, to becoming a mediator and coach for conflict resolution in San Francisco, and to creating the Empathy Set. Can you share your story and how it all left you to develop these tools to enhance emotional intelligence?
Yeah, that is the story of my life. Growing up in South Africa, a country in trouble with apartheid, not treating people with respect and dignity, and being concerned about that, and that motivating me to study law and to see how I could be an agent for change. And then, as you point out, ultimately finding that there were limitations to the way we practice law and that there are better ways of communicating when we are in conflict, and essentially discovering mediation. And from that, being inspired to train others to deal with their conflicts better. And that ultimately led me to being a trainer and a coach. But it was as I worked as a mediator and also working as a trainer that I sort of was aware that there were these tools and opportunities to provide support to folks out there in need. So instead of them having to come to a professional, I wanted to empower people to be able to take responsibility for their own conflict situations, whatever was showing up in life. And so that's ultimately what led me to, as you were saying, the talking sticks, which help make sure we have balance in our conversations. And then the feelings and needs cards. As a mediator, I really discovered that those are the two key conversations, what we're feeling and what we're needing. So in that way, people were empowered to take care of things themselves.
You know, it's really interesting when I think of people in conflict, and like you said, you live through a very tumultuous time in a
Mhm.
tumultuous area. Um, but you understood empathy. How do people develop empathy? Because I know, when I think about trauma, trauma hurt people, you know, but I think the same goes for people with empathy and compassion, can also pass that along.
Mhm.
And so,
Mhm.
but how does it develop? Is it something that you, especially when you are in an environment that is tumultuous?
Right. Well, I think that is a great question, because it also sort of begs that question, are we born empathic? And I'd say, yes, we are. Babies um, cry when they hear other babies crying. So we surely are. And then following from that is sort of saying, can we develop our empathic skills? So I'd say yes to both of those. We're all born with a capacity to connect with others, and we can certainly develop that skill. Um, I suppose as you were sharing that, I was remembering growing up with my mother. I had three younger sisters, and whenever I'd walk down the corridor to my bedroom, she'd say, walk quietly. You don't want to wake up your sisters. But she would do that almost every time. So what she was, in a certain sense, if I reflect on that, she was helping me to make that shift from being egocentric, and in other words, essentially just focused on myself, to being other-centric, having care for others. And I think that's part of the development path that hopefully all humans go along. In other words, going from being egocentric, in other words, where we're absorbed with ourselves, to being other-centric, and in some ways this can be both good. In other words, where we care for our family and we care for our tribe. The danger is we become ethnocentric, because I think the ultimate when we're truly empathic is when we're world centric, and when we can embrace and love and have care for everyone. So to me, that's that developmental path that we all need to go along. As I say, moving from being focused on ourselves to focused on others like us, and then ultimately to all of us. And as I was saying, I think a lot of it does come from the nurturing, like as I say, with that I experienced with my mother, that she helped me be aware of the impact of my behavior on others. And to me, ultimately, that's the sort of the progression to ultimately being able to be empathic, where we can, in a more nuanced way, connect with other people's experiences, hold the space for them, and let them know that we've understood what their experience is, and even sometimes take a step to help out. But again, I'd say that is as I say, that journey from being self-absorbed to my people and then to all is ultimately that journey of towards being a more empathic human being.
Yes. And it's that's really interesting because that is the goal. We want empathetic children. Um However, I feel like is there a line, right? Because there's a point where, as a trauma survivor myself, I struggle a lot with um and I'm working on this, people
Mm-hmm,
pleasing tendencies
mm-hmm,
where I kind of forget myself or forget my
mm-hmm,
my needs
mm-hmm,
in order
mm-hmm,
to um make others around me feel more comfortable or
mm-hmm,
more
mm-hmm,
satisfied.
mm-hmm.
And where is that line? Do you believe that's something that we skirt around?
Well, I think that's such a, what you're sort of grappling with is so important, Lorilee. In other words, trying to figure out how we can both care for others but not neglect the care for ourselves. In other words, not lose ourselves in someone else's care. And that to me is where our healthy boundaries come in, but also
Mm,
where our healthy self love or self empathy comes in. In other words, to give, we need to have something to give. And if we're always giving and are depleted, then we're not actually going to be that helpful in the world. So I think to me, self care, self love, is really important, and taking the time to know what are my values, what's really important to me, and then again coming back to those needs. What do I need? What is the life-giving need that I have in this moment, that I'm not being narcissistic about and saying that I have this need, and how do I go about expressing my needs to get what I want, and then also holding that boundary when someone is infringing on my values, my needs, or even my legal rights. So I think a lot of that is work that we need to do. In other words, you need to take the time to reflect on what are my values that I want to see in life. And then again, from situation to situation, what are my needs? And I'll just, as a quick little shout out for the empathy set, that's where it's become so helpful, is helping people identify in a particular situation what they're feeling and what they're needing, so that they can express themselves and be assertive. And just to quickly say, so often I encounter folks saying, "Well, I don't like being a people pleaser. I don't like avoiding," which I tend to agree. That's not not the way to
mm.
go. But they also don't want to be aggressive, and they're afraid that if they do speak up, they're going to be perceived as aggressive. And so, to me, the key distinction, or the words that I like using over aggression, is saying we can be assertive, and there's nothing sinister, bad, or evil about being assertive. It's just standing up, and if everyone stands up for themselves, that would be a great society. So I believe we want to be assertive in life, not aggressive. And being assertive doesn't mean that we're being aggressive.
That's right, right. Well, I thought about what you were saying about how your mother would tell you
Mm,
to just move quietly so you don't wake your
mm, mm,
sisters. I guess the difference is for someone who was people pleased. For me, I felt like I was shamed into, you know, walking quietly through through, let's say,
mm-hmm,
in a quiet setting. And I guess maybe that may have been the difference. I'm not quite sure. I'm now I that has me thinking of a lot about, like, why did I feel like such shame and this need to people please. But I think I think it does have everything to do with how your mother how your parents, how your caregivers have spoken to you about,
Hmm.
empathy and caring for
Right. No,
others.
and that's such a sort of interesting intersection you're getting at there, Lorilee. In other words, the ways in which we use emotions to influence others.
Hmm.
In other words, so sometimes we'll shame a person to get them to behave in a particular kind of a way,
That's
right? And so some of these the social emotions have that little bit of that feeling like this, the shame and guilt, etc., that are trying to help us be attentive to the needs, of others. The piece, though, I find interesting in terms of shaming, it's where the person is sort of essentially getting you to feel like there's something wrong with you, as opposed to just feeling guilty. In other words, let's just coming back to my situation with my mother. I would hope that I would feel a little guilty if I did wake my sisters up, right? So that to me would be an appropriate emotion that would be guiding me to say to be careful myself, so I wouldn't even have to rely on my mother to say keep quiet. But if it shifted into me saying, I've gone now from being feeling guilty that I've done it to I'm a bad person,
mm,
and now I've turned that energy towards me as if there's something wrong with me. That's I think that's where we're not using that emotional energy in a healthy kind of a way. But again, as I say, it is interesting how sometimes we do use emotions, as I say, to guide behavior, and we'll sometimes use those what are sometimes referred to as those negative emotions to influence a person in that way, in the way that you experienced.
mm. Right. Well, no, that's a great explanation. I think that that really tells me a lot about my people-pleasing tendencies. Um, I do want to go into conflict resolution because that's a big thing that you deal
Mm-hmm.
with. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like that is such a huge thing that a lot of people try to avoid. They
Mm-hmm.
just try to avoid conflict
Mm-hmm.
in general because they
Mm-hmm.
don't wanna feel uncomfortable. Um, my daughter, when she was, like, 18 months, I put her in a Waldorf school where we, it was like a mommy and me or a parent and me class, and I remember whenever my daughter would do something, maybe take a toy, I remember the, teacher saying, "No, don't get involved. This is their opportunity for conflict resolution." And I thought that was really fascinating because then I go home to, like, my friend group that I
Mm-hmm.
just developed, and I felt shame. I felt bad, like, not stepping in when I knew what these teachers were telling me. "No, they need to develop these skills." Why is it so difficult?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I think that's keeps me in business. I'll just say that. In other words, but yeah, the in terms of that avoidance thing, I think for many people we grow up not liking conflict. I mean, partly it's because in those conflict experiences, it's often because we perceive that we're not getting what we want. It's generally accompanied by uncomfortable feelings, and our mind is racing with sort of messages that say like this person's out to get me, I'm in danger, they're bad, and all that kind of thing. So it's an unpleasant thing, it's uncertain. So I think for a lot of people, the script that they learn is avoid conflict as much as possible, and if you can't avoid it, fight hard. So you'll sometimes sort of see people avoid, and avoid, and then they come down with a heavy. Suddenly, it's like out of the blue, and you're like, "Whoa, where did that
Yeah.
come from?" So just to say, first up, just to say that's I think a script that a lot of people have, and again, it's coming back to that comment that I made about aggression assertion. Like if when people experience conflict, you'll often see them getting aggressive, and that does get scary. So I think it's almost inevitable that for a lot of us that we do have that aversion. I certainly grew up with that kind of an aversion. I was avoidant. I found it sort of really, really scary. And yet, as you're pointing out, and like in that Waldorf context, we all need to have the opportunities of learning and growing and developing those skills. And if we never get those opportunities, we're never going to grow. In the field of organizational development, especially as it relates to teams, there's a model developed by a guy called Bruce Tuckman way back in 1965. But you may have even heard of it. It's about how teams go from forming, it's almost like the honeymoon stage, to storming, then norming, and then performing. And then ultimately, if they end, they'll adjourn. But the key part is going from that forming. So even imagine your little daughter arriving at the kindergarten, being excited, like new friends to play with, and they're having fun. Like that's the forming stage where they're just having some fun, a little bit of the honeymoon, until one of them takes the toy that the other one wanted. Right. So now they've got that little conflict. So in that developmental stage, they're also sort of saying, if you join a team, you're going to have that excitement. Hey, Lorilee, we're on the team together. We're all excited. And that'll go well until, hey, Lorilee, you're doing something that you're not meant to be doing. And now we have a conflict. So that takes us from forming to storming. And even though that model was developed for teams, I think I've observed that it applies equally in our relationships. And what it's really sort of saying is that we need to allow the natural conflict that comes along in our early relationships to grow and develop those skills and to learn how we're going to go about dealing with our conflicts. So again, coming back to those people pleasing ways, imagine you meet a new friend. It's like, oh, it's so nice to meet you, Lorilee, and everything's going, great until something happens. And I think, oh, I don't want to have a conflict with Lorilee, right? So I'm going to hold on to what I'm truly feeling, and I'm not going to express this to Lorilee. Well, there we have the start of problems because the issue is not being addressed in a direct way. So again, I'll just say what I'm really trying to get at, Lorilee, is saying life brings us opportunities in our relationships that we either take to develop those skills, and then hopefully we do, and we discover that we need to learn how to be good listeners and how to express ourselves with using I statements, and how we sometimes need to learn to negotiate as well. In other words, use the information about your needs and my needs to come up with solutions for everyone. And if we don't do that and develop those skills, chances are we're going to suppress our emotions, we're going to ignore the issues that are important to us. And then, just like I said, how we'll have that person comes down with a heavy fist. But another thing that'll sometimes happen is we encounter the passive aggressive behaviors where people are no longer being direct. So they'll make a little joke about, maybe someone's got a weight issue, and they'll sort of say like something appropriate that sort of is a little bit of a put down. Or
Mm-hmm.
they'll forget to do something, or they'll have agreed to do something. And then they'll just like, yeah, I didn't really think I needed to agree to that in the first place. So that to me is all of the consequences of not developing those skills. And if we, as again, coming back to that forming, storming developmental model, those early conflicts in our teams, those early conflicts in our relationships are actually giving us the opportunity to find our way. Now, just finally, just to finish, just to say, I would agree that the children need to have their experiences, but they also need the guidance. And so often, in life, that one of the primary ways we learn is by observing others. And so the first setting where children are learning about conflict is in the home. They're watching you and your husband. How do you
Right.
deal with things when there's a conflict? They can feel the energy of like, there's something's going on. Now mommy and daddy are separated, or do they see mommy and daddy coming together and sitting and actually addressing their issues and listening with respect? Or do they hear people shouting and yelling and maybe even seeing things flying through the air as people are throwing things at
Mm-hmm.
them? So again, we need to be so conscious of what are we role modeling to our children. And then in those more learning settings like a Waldorf school, again, beyond letting them have the experience, I do believe there should be some guidance and some pointers as to what are healthy practices for folks to use when they have a conflict.
Yeah, it's so interesting because before I went into treatment in 2020. I think my daughter was around 5 years old. Um, but so she had 5 years of me being very dysregulated. I would shout and I would yell and I would, I would yell at my husband. My husband would shut down. And it was a very difficult time.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily I was, and then my son was really young. He was 18 months. Um, but then I went into treatment. I learned all of these skills, regulating skills. I did a lot of healing. And I do see that my daughter still has, you know, those moments where it is difficult and she'll shut down. My husband and I have really grown since then. And, instead of shutting down, because before it was like, I don't want to fight in front of our children. I don't want to
Mhm,
yell in front
mhm,
of our children.
mhm, mhm,
So his way of doing that was just shutting down and not talking.
mhm,
And then
mhm,
obviously I would
mhm,
be very loud and aggressive.
mhm,
Um, but now, since from the last 4 years, we've really developed a way to resolve our conflict in front
mhm,
of our children.
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
and my daughter has been so much better at that, but she does have these moments where she shuts down or she yells. And we are still working with her that. My son, on the other hand, he kind of really grew into the like developed with us in
mhm.
like in our
And then your
conflict
new ways.
resolution in our
Yes,
new ways. And
yes.
it's so different. He is very
Mhm,
much like I'll resolve it. He's very empathic, and he's very aware. And I think
mhm,
that was a very interesting thing. Like he's very aware of his emotions and why he feels angry because he's tired
mhm,
or he
mhm,
didn't like something that happened, and he can
mhm,
communicate
mhm.
that. So what you're saying is like I see it firsthand in my home and like
Yes.
what your children see. Yes.
Well, so many positives from what you're experiencing, and I'm so happy to hear of your progress and just taking ownership of your life and taking those steps to heal and integrate, what happened in the past. And as you say, you can literally see the fruits of your labor with your children, and how beautiful
Mm.
that is to see your son responding so well. And I sense also maybe a little bit of sadness relating to your daughter, but knowing
Hmm.
that she's now getting the good guidance and the support moving forward. But I also love the way you were at the very end when you're talking about your son and saying how he's attuned to his emotions and he's able to express them, because that to me is such a sad thing. Is we get so many messages, not just about conflict being bad, but also about emotions being bad. And so we get disconnected from a vital sort of source of energy and insight in life, that you know that, that we're just not tapping into if we aren't attuned to our emotions. And I know a lot of folks will often say, well, the positive emotions and the negative, and I only want to have the positives and I don't want to have the negatives. I think the ultimate
Hmm.
insight is when we get to that place where we can see that all emotions is giving us information. So even like you're saying, when your son is angry, instead of saying, so many times we hear that message of anger is bad, don't feel anger. I always say, and when a person is experiencing anger, it tells me two key things. They care strongly about something, and their strategy is to address what they care about isn't working. And then they get this whoosh of energy to help them address what that situation is. And tragically, at that point, they often act out. And that's where another key thing I think with emotions is distinguishing between just the feeling of just feeling it and the behavior. So when the person slams the door or yells and shouts, that's the behavior. But even, going back to describing vulnerably your own, some of your own behaviors, what we know is that behind those behaviors were valid feelings. Something wasn't
Hmm.
working for you that you were seeking to express. And again, it's so lovely to hear that you've developed and the tools, but also done some of that foundational work to integrate and to heal some of the pain of the past.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yes, it's been a lot
Hmm.
of work, but it's been
Yeah.
very rewarding. And that's what I like to share with others. Like it may not feel like anything's happening when you're working really hard at,
Hmm.
on yourself, but I'm telling after a while you see the fruits of your labor and how in the
Yeah.
work that you've done. Um,
Yeah.
I do want to talk about empathy set
Hmm.
because I'm thinking I need to get some of these
Hmm.
and use them with my children. But
Hmm.
could you kind of describe empathy set in more detail?
Sure. So it's two packs of cards. So each pack has got 56 cards. The one is 56 feelings, and the other one is 56 needs. And there was an author, Marshall Rosenberg, who wrote a book some time ago called Nonviolent Communication. I don't know if you've heard of that, but
Mm,
he had quite an impact, and there are a lot of people that practice it. And he has like a quote or a way of saying that if we can acknowledge another person's feelings and needs, we're giving them empathy. And so often when we say to people empathy, like even in the very beginning, when you're saying, how do we develop our empathy, skills? So now here we're getting to, I suppose, more like a grown-up methodology of how we can go about developing our empathy skills. so, so I'm getting a little tied up in knots here, Lorilee. But what I'm really trying to get to is how we often struggle identifying and knowing what it is that we're feeling and needing. And as I was saying, Marshall Rosenberg would always say, if we can just focus on what the other person is feeling and needing, we're giving them empathy. So when we now I'm remembering what I was wanting to say, what is that oftentimes people say, well, empathy, like that's so woo-woo. How do I go about doing that? But with the cards, it's just a simple way of being able to connect with another person and saying, okay, so I've listened to what Lorilee's shared with me. This is what happened. These are the so-called facts, the data points of the characters and the cast and things like that. What did she feel? And what is she needing? And when I can put my attention, my full attention, and trying to be, I call it like an empathy detective of trying to think like, if I was Lorilee, not John in Lorilee's shoes, but I was
Mm-hmm.
Lorilee with her worldviews, with her beliefs, with her experiences, what would I be feeling? And if I was Lorilee, having figured out all those feelings, what would I be needing? So to me, that's really the essence of the pack is, as I say, prompts to help us get in touch with what we're feeling and needing about any life situation, but also, so that's self-empathy, what I'm feeling and needing, but also to be able to put myself in the shoes of another and imagine what they're feeling and needing. And so what that does is it's gratifying in and of itself just to be able to connect with what's really going on, because often we'll have difficult life experiences and they're kind of confusing. And it's like, well,
Mm-hmm.
what was I feeling? I was torn. Was it, or like you're saying, is it guilt? Was it shame? Am I jealous? What is it? So they're essentially prompts for ourselves. And then, as I say, when we have a conversation with someone else, when we've done that homework, the conversation is likely to go better. Because a lot of times in conversations, especially when there's a little bit of a conflict, people, again, a pattern that we often see is people don't come and express their feelings and needs. They typically express their solutions. They'll come and say, here's the solution that I want. And then the other person says, oh, that's you, what you think the solution is? Here's my solution. And then they batter away at one another. My solution, my solution, my solution, my solution, and on they go. What we try to do generally in conflict resolution is to say, behind this solution, there are underlying valid needs that you have. There's needs that are leading you to take this position, and there are underlying needs on this side that are leading you to take this position too. So what we're trying to do is help people discover what their needs are so they can come up with an integrated solution. So again, the cards really are that, are prompts to help us get in touch with those two key elements in any conflict, what we're feeling and what we're needing. So we know what's going on for us, and we can also anticipate what's going on for them. And when they say to us, this is our demand, we can say, wow, you really seem passionate about that solution. And if I'm understanding you, the reason why you're saying this is the ideal solution because it meets your needs for A, B, and C. And they're like, oh yeah, yeah, exactly. And then I say, well, that's interesting because I have needs for D and E. And can we now start brainstorming in a way that you get your needs and I get my needs? And you'll see now the positions have gone, and now we're focusing here at the level of the needs. So that to me, I sort of rambled on a little bit there, Lorilee, but that to me is, as I say, prompts to help people get in touch with feelings and needs for themselves and for others.
Is it a good, do you use it in your own practice to
Yes,
help
yes.
with conflict
Oh yeah,
resolution?
oh, yeah, 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 yeah. So what happened was I encountered another version of these feeling and needs cards, and I started using them in training contexts. And I was training a water district, so I was mainly working with these guys that spend most of their days on the street digging holes and with water pipes. And for the most part, I'd pair them up for little active listening practice sessions. So that the one guy would sit here and the other one would sit here, and this guy would share something, and then this guy would have to summarize to demonstrate that they've understood. And that, of course, is a key skill in life and in conflict resolution. And I'd always say to them, or I'd say, make sure that you've demonstrated to the person that you're listening to that you've heard the factual content. That's always important, the what happened. And I'd say, and see if you can acknowledge at least one other feeling that this person's expressing. And what I'd find is it was almost like I felt like I was asking them to do Mission Impossible. They couldn't seem to that sometimes maybe get too frustrated. When I brought these cards along and I said, now you can use these cards, it was just transformational. Part of it was, I think it was made a lot of people think, oh, it's like playing poker. So they started having fun. And when people have fun, they start to learn. They started realizing that their experience was much richer. And when they had the prompts, they could connect with it. So as I said, I started using it in a training setting. It really worked well. And then I was doing a mediation at a school district, and I was on a team. And I just had the sense, I thought, I wonder whether those cards wouldn't work here. And the director of human resources had been a therapist, and I ran the idea by her. And I said, what do you think? And she said, with children, we'll often use a object of distraction, like a teddy bear. So the kids playing with the teddy bear, and then we'll ask them the more probing, difficult questions that we need, to get to. So
Hmm.
anyway, she encouraged me to use them. And I'll just say they had a profound impact. They really help, because what I've observed a lot of the time in my work as a mediator, Lorilee, is when people will show up, they're not trying to show me that they're the most unreasonable, illiterate sort of person out there. They're trying to show me that they're the reasonable one. And they'll often say to me, yeah,
Mhm.
I think we can work this out. We can keep it civil. And I'd be, oh, great. So you're saying you can keep it civil? And I'd speak to the other person and I'd say, yeah, I think we can keep it civil. So I'd say, great, we've got the pathway of civility and respect. We're going to have a respectful conversation about your conflict, because to have a conflict doesn't mean you need to be disrespectful. And we'd start down this path. Almost always, as mediators, we establish ground rules. So we'd have the ground rules. We'd be walking down this path of respect and civility, and then someone would veer off the path. And we're like, hey, and I'd try and bring them back. And then sometimes I'd be successful and we'd continue. But it always felt kind of hit and miss for me as to whether I was able to get them staying on the path of, path of civility. And when I started using the cards, what I found was it enabled people to talk about what was difficult for them, but in a way that didn't have to demean or put the other person down, and that they could discover that each of them had feelings and needs. Because in any situation that you find yourself in life, you're going to have feelings about it and needs that relate to that, and that other person's going to have feelings and needs about that. So a key insight in conflict resolution is that until we acknowledge to some degree that the pain of that past, we're going to get stuck and not be able to move on. So what I've found, I sometimes call it an acknowledgement session or an empathy session, is I'll have a dedicated session where each person will have an opportunity of sharing what their experience was like, how they were impacted, and having their feelings and needs acknowledged. And then the other person has their feelings and needs acknowledged. What I found is then there's a significant reduction of emotional charge. And now we can start problem solving. We can start focusing on what their needs are and figuring out what they're going to do about their relationship and what they're going to do in the future.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, I can imagine that is very difficult to, when two people come with their own solutions and their own thoughts and honestly their own baggage and their own life experiences. And it's
Well, if
hard.
I can, just on that, because it might be helpful just to give a simple little example of that. So here's
Mhm.
another example from me as a mediator. So I live in the city of Oakland in California, and there was a dispute between the tenants and the owners of an apartment block. So it was really about the money. And we had a meeting at City Hall and made some progress. Second meeting, I go there, I'm on time. The owners of the apartment block, they get there on time. And the tenants association walk in, and I'd say they were 40 minutes late, if that, like maybe even more. But anyway, sit down, and the elderly spokesperson, he sits down, he says, this is the last time we meet here. From now on, all the meetings have to be at the apartment block. So he's making a demand, right? He's saying all the solution has to be, at least for our meetings, they have to be at the apartment block. So he's made that, this is my position. We have to meet there. So as the mediator, I don't say, oh, whoa, whoa, whoa. Say, thank you for sharing that. It sounds like you guys are frustrated about having to meet here at City Hall. And can you share a little bit more about what's going on? The guy says, yeah, it is frustrating. It's hard for us. Many of us are elderly to get from the apartment block to to downtown Oakland, find parking, find the building, find the room. Say, wow, that does sound really, really difficult. And then I said to them, so I'm acknowledging their frustration. I'm not saying like, get over it, like, what's wrong with you guys? I'm saying that sounds really difficult. And then I said, and it sounds like what you guys need is an easily accessible venue, right? That's their true need. So behind the position, meet at the apartment block, is the true need. We need an easily accessible venue. So as the mediator, remember I said the talking stick helps keep the balance. I turned to the owners and I said, what about you guys? How do you feel about meeting here or there? And they said, well, we don't really care. We drive in our, our offices are in San Jose. We drive up in our BMW. Parking's not an issue. We don't have an, we don't, we, it's that isn't an issue for us. But there were two of them, and the younger of the two said, but you know what? We've only owned this building a couple of years, and the tenants have been there 20, 30 years. So every time we've had meetings there, it's like they have home field advantage because they're at their place. We may be the owners, but they've lived there 20, 30 years. So remember, I said to the tenants, you need an easily accessible venue, right? At this point, I turned to the owners. I said, sounds like what you need is a neutral venue. So now you can see we've gone from demanding that we meet at the apartment block to the other guy saying, well, we don't really mind, but we want it to be neutral. So now at least we know we need a easily accessible venue that's neutral. And then I said, right, let's brainstorm. What ideas do you have for venues that are easily accessible and are neutral? And they said, well, next door to the apartment block, there's a church. On the church premises, there's a meeting hall. It's easily accessible and it's also neutral. And that, in a simple kind of a way, is really what we're constantly trying to do in our relationship. See if we can acknowledge emotions, just let people have their feelings. Don't be freaked out if someone's angry or disappointed or surprised or just whatever's kind of going on. I can let them have their feelings. When we let them have their feelings, that's where we see sort of profound shifts, and then focus on needs and see if we can problem solve to find solutions that meet your needs and my needs. But that really is the sort of the essence of conflict resolution.
And that really brings up for me, you wrote an article, a piece about response, reaction to response, and
Mm-hmm,
I think that has a lot to do with what you were just talking about. Instead
mm-hmm,
of reacting very angrily, it's more
mm-hmm.
responding and understanding the needs. And you also talked about some resources that you provide on your website, to help with these triggers of reacting and responding, to responding. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. Well, in this day and age, we all have websites and the like, and so I do
Mm.
have a blog where I write. But at my main website, of course, I've got johnford.com for my regular business. But in terms of my promotion of tools to help people with their interpersonal conflict, the place to go is empathyset.com. And
Mhm.
as I say, I have a blog there with resources. There's my dictionary, talking cards. There's the app version of the feeling and needs cards. So those are all available there. And there's also I'll provide a link for you, Lorilee, if you want to send it out to your listeners, where
Mhm.
I'll send them a PDF copy of my dictionary of feelings and needs. And then there's another, I think, a really, really important tool that ties in with that reactivity piece, which is the calming routine. I believe that every human being should have a calming routine that they've thought through and rehearsed before they've got into a tricky situation. And it rests on using your body as your early warning system. Because the beautiful thing about the body is always present. You can't breathe in the future and you can't breathe in the past. You can only breathe in the present. So when we put our attention on our breath, and that's what I always encourage, is one element of a person's calming routine should involve breath. But when we have a calming routine that we've worked out, can really significantly help us, as I say, calm down. And so instead of being reactive, using those templates and those scripts that we picked up in an unhealthy way in childhood, we start applying the new ways. We start listening. We start, figuring out what do we feel and need before we have that conversation. And we are creative problem solvers together with, whatever life presents us.
Mm. Well, that's great. I do deeply feel that breathing also helps for me when I'm feeling triggered. I do my box breathing, and
Mm-hmm.
that's something that has always been extremely helpful for me, and I think everyone would benefit from that. And
Absolutely.
I love the example, you can't breathe in the future, you can't breathe in the past. You it's
That's
it's it's a present, um activity, a present thing to do when you are feeling triggered. So
Right.
staying
Well, and
present.
exactly. And so so breath is something we do in the present, but I've had situations with clients where they'll say, they don't realize that they've dysregulated. And then I'll say, pay attention to your body. And when they start paying attention to their body, they discover that even though in their minds, they're not aware, their body is. And their
Right.
body is reflecting the experience. And so tapping into the body gives you the clue something's going on, and then you want to have some kind of a routine that you implement to help yourself calm down.
Excellent. Well, John, do you have anything that you would like to add before we go?
Well, maybe not too much, but I was just going to say there's two lovely. I know they sometimes they sound a little hokey, but I think they distill some key wisdom that I think is so super helpful. So the first thing is it's called name it to tame it. So it's just encouraging people when they are going through life and they're experiencing something that's upsetting or even that's happy, that they're happy about, just to name it to yourself, to saying, oh, that was irritating or that was a surprise. Just let yourself know that you've got the message. They say that when we do that, we can almost reduce our stress by up to 50%. So that's the one
Wow.
thing, name it to tame it. And then the other one is feel it to heal it. So again, it's that encouragement once you've named it, because sometimes we'll name it, like imagine our friend doesn't show up for a coffee date. So we're feeling disappointed. And then we say, oh, I'm feeling disappointed. And then hardly have we said disappointed, then we're telling ourselves we shouldn't be feeling disappointed. We should get over it. We should find a more positive emotion or something like that. So my encouragement is for folks to allow themselves to feel more and not to resist feelings, not to realize, oh, I'm feeling disappointed and then trying to stop feeling that.
Mm, yeah.
The pathway to healing and integration actually comes from allowing ourselves to feel what we didn't feel at an earlier point in our life. So name it to tame it, feel it to heal it.
That's right. That's great, great advice. And I love that. And I feel like it's very effective. And so thank you so much.
Thank you, Lorilee. It was wonderful spending time with you.
Absolutely. Well, that was John Ford, founder of Empathy Set. For more information on John and where you can purchase the Empathy Set or explore the many tools he has developed, please go to empathyset.com or, you can find the link in the show notes as well. January's issue of Authentic Insider is out. John has actually contributed his piece in December's issue called Reaction to Response, and I highly recommend that you check it out. You can check out Authentic Insider and past issues at traumasurvivorthriver.com. That's traumasurvivorthriver.com. You can also find past episodes of a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast. So if you haven't already, please subscribe to my email list to get Authentic Insider magazine in your inbox monthly. Join us next week when I speak with Sam Kabert, breathwork teacher and author, when we discuss the Toad Venom psychedelic 5-MeO DMT used for healing and my personal experience with it. You've been listening to a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast on Mental Health News Radio Network. I'm Lorilee Binstock. Thank you so much for being a part of the conversation. Take care.